Chosen nation. Now, chapter 11, from verse 10 down to 26, what it does, it records the genealogies from Shem to Abraham. So after the confusion there at Babel with all the languages and the people were dispersed, they moved out to the, as the commentators say, to the horizons of the earth, or at least the known world at that time. But they took with them their Babylonian hearts and the idolatrous religions that they had, regardless of whether they were descendants of Shem, Ham, or Japheth. Now, there were a few exceptions. Two that I found, of course, we know of Job from Arabia, and then the mysterious Melchizedek in Canaan. In chapter 5, we had 10 generations from Seth to Noah. And in chapter 11, it shows 10 generations, again from Shem to Abraham. Chapter 11 completes there in verse 26 the primeval history. And beginning with verse 27, now we go into the patriarchal history. So Shem's genealogy here is like a bridge to a new hope, to a new era. And the midpoint of that genealogy is the birth of Peleg. Now, Eber, we read, was the father of Peleg. And if you recall that Eber is related to the word Hebrew. So it is considered that Eber is the ancestor of the Hebrew people. And Peleg then, of course, was born when Eber was 34 years of age. Now, it's interesting as you read that in chapter 10, Peleg's brother Joktan is mentioned. But in chapter 11, Joktan is not mentioned. So we now can see that we're going to be following the line of Peleg, which leads us to Abram, who is the hope of God's people. And it is through this line that the promise of Genesis 3:15 is coming. Now, just like Shem, Abraham is named first, or Abram at this point. But it's not because he was the firstborn of Terah. He's named first, just like Shem, because of his prominence. Now, Noah, the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, was the hero of the time. And here, Terah, the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran, he was not any kind of a hero. It's going to be up to, and it will be on his son Abram, who is the one that will be the great man. Now, Abram means that he is exalted as to his father, sort of like in noble birth. And later, in chapter 17, we'll see that God will change his name from Abram to Abraham, meaning the father of many nations. So we've got a lot of hope abounding here. Moses shows that God's promise to Eve is not going to be thwarted, will not be thwarted. God cannot be overthrown by what really is a deep state at that time and now. And we can go so far as to say that there really is no power at all in the universe that can stop, that can hamper the Lord God Almighty, who is the creator of everything that there is, through whom all things were created, and that without him there is nothing made that would be made. You get that from John, first chapter. So the seed that was scattered all over the place from Babel, still God preserved 10 men from Noah down to Abraham. And so the line of Peleg now is the one that is going to bring grace. So we talk about Father Abraham and his faith. Now understand me. I believe that between Pooler and Springfield, there's a small community that's called Tiger Ridge. Now, whether it's factual or not, I don't know. I heard a lot of stories and I heard a lot of jokes here since I've been here. And I read an article in the Savannah News on Tiger Ridge. But the stories are that they're all supposedly interrelated. Well, if you read the generations of Terah, there are implicit implications into who married who. Terah was the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran was the father of Lot. But Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans, the land of his birth, while his father Terah was still living. Meanwhile, Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. And in parentheses in some, it says Milcah and her sister Iscah were daughters of Nahor's brother Haran. But Sarai was unable to become pregnant and had no children. All right, Haran fathered Lot, and he's the nephew that's going to bring I'm getting ahead of myself, Abraham, a lot of worry in the near future. Nahor married his niece, Milcah, who was the orphaned daughter of Haran, the brother of Abram and Nahor, who died. Of Sarai, Abram's wife, we learned two things. One, that by omission, we don't have any information about her being the daughter of Terah at this point. And therefore, she is the half-sister of Abram by another wife of Terah. Some commentators, I think they say this in jest, wrote that it could be possible that Moses withheld the information so not to ruin the suspense that comes when Abraham, to save his neck, reveals to Abimelech that Sarai was his half-sister. We also learn that she's barren. She can't have kids. And this right here sets up the challenges that are going to come to Abraham's faith. It's also important, though, that we understand that in this little tiny inbred family of Terah, they were all moon worshipers, living in the center of the lunar religion, in the Ur of the Chaldeans. The city was dominated by massive 3-story ziggurat. And there's a picture on the insert there of the one that was found back in the 20s. It was found in an archaeological find there between the 1920s and the early 1930s in the southern part of Iraq, which is where the Ur was located. Now the ziggurat was built by Ur-Nammu. And the top of it apparently had a room with a shrine to Nana, the moon god. And there a cemetery was found, and it revealed sealed ritual sites that showed the horrors of human sacrifice. Now, if you compare the temples of the Aztecs and the Mayans with the pictures and the drawings of the ziggurats in Iraq, that area in Babylon, you'll see a really close resemblance that they have in the architecture, in the design. And know that the Mayans, in its documented history, along with the Aztecs, performed human sacrifices also. Well, let's get back to Abram. If you have any doubt that this was what he was raised in and what he followed, the type of religion, all you have to do is look at Joshua chapter 24, verse 2. And that should remove some doubt from you. Joshua said to the people, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago, your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River, and they worshipped other gods." So Abram's family, including Abram, were polytheistic idolaters. Their names came from the cult of moon worshippers. Terah's name is related to the word Yareh, meaning moon, and also Yerah, meaning lunar month. Sarai is equivalent to the Akkadian Soratu, or queen, which was the name of the wife of the moon god Sin. He was the principal god at that time of the Babylonians, and on down through to the 5th, 6th, 7th century AD. Milcah is the same as the goddess Malatu, who is a title of Ishtar, who was the daughter of the moon god. And you know that Ishtar was one of the principal gods of Babylonia, and they have the Ishtar gate, and that's a whole history in itself. Now, he may have, as a moon worshiper, maybe he stood gazing or stargazing while he stood at the top of the ziggurat, and as he watched the offerings and performing his obeisance. Did he, this is the question, witness the dark side of moon worship there in the silver shrine room of Nana, where they performed the sacrifices, human sacrifices? I don't know. This is just speculation from a lot of the commentators. Maybe he mused there that there was something greater than the order of nature, and that the waxing and the waning of the moon gave evidence of a power beyond that of Nana. Now that name came up a lot, so to all the Nanas out there, maybe we're going to have to look at you all a little differently. That would change great-grandma or grandma's name. Abraham's faith. Now in verses 31 and 32, Terah took Abram his son and Lot the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son's Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they got to Haran, they settled there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Now, if this is all that we have, you can conclude that it was Terah that moved his family to Haran and lived there until he died. And then after that, God called Abram. But Genesis and the Old Testament and in the New Testament, what doesn't allow for this? It tells us something different. When God himself affirms his covenant with Abram in Genesis 15, verse 7, God says, I am the Lord who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. The Levites, when they made their corporate confession after the Babylonian captivity, in Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 7, they said, you are the Lord, the God who chose Abram and brought him out of Ur of the Chaldeans. And then you've got the explicit, detailed account that was given by Stephen when he went up before the Supreme Court at that time, the Sanhedrin, in Acts 7, verses 2 and 4. When he gives his defense and he says, brothers and fathers, hear me. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran, and said to him, go out from your land and from your kindred, and go into the land that I will show you. Then he went out from the land of the Chaldeans and lived in Haran. And after his father died, God removed him from there into this land in which you are now living. We got 3 accounts at least. So in the darkest Ur of the Chaldeans, this dark place, Abram saw the glory of God and his call to depart. Maybe he convinced Terah to go with him, but when they got to Haran, which was also another moon-worshipping center, Terah, maybe he just wouldn't budge from there, just being a grumpy old man. I'm not going any further. So, what did Abram do? Being a dutiful son, bid his time until Terah's death. Then he went off again to the promised land. I say all this to underscore, underline, and put a bunch of exclamation points, marks at the end about Abram's obedience and his monumental act of faith. Here was a pagan, not young. He was prosperous. He was well settled in his pagan world. Today we'd say he'd be well settled in the secular world. And he was the only one in his culture who heard God's word. And on the basis of hearing alone, he risked everything to follow God. He didn't say he gave it up. He risked it all to follow God. Who else today is comparable to any of this? I can name a few that come close. Missionaries that give up and risk things to go to another part of the earth to preach the gospel one way or another. we can give great kudos to them. Well, how did he do it? Did he, well, all right, I'll go. You know, I kind of like it here. I'm kind of settled. I'm doing all right. No, he did it happily. The writer of Hebrews, he chose to use Abraham to illustrate the definition of faith. He writes, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. Pardon, Craig, I'll just use you as an example. Not that you're going to do this, but you have a dream or something, you hear God's voice, you know it's Him, and He says, get up and I want you to go, and I'll tell you that you're there when you get there. You have no idea of where that is. Would you go? Biblical faith possesses a future certainty. That's knowing without doubt that, I'll use the term X, this thing is going to come about. It's going to happen. It is. Now you couple that with a visual certainty, which is a conviction of things that you don't see. Faith then, those two together, produces a dynamic certainty. It's something that gives a reality of actual existence to those things for which we hope for. It's not well, I got a 99% chance of that it's going to come about. No. I know it's 100% chance that it's going to happen. It's going to come about. When Abraham heard God's call, he became certain. He knew without a doubt that God would lead him to a land where he would establish a great people. He was certain that that future promise was transposed to the present. That's how certain it was. It happened. It's already occurred. Philo of Alexandria said that Abram considered the things not present as beyond question already present by just the sheer reason of the sure steadfastness of Him, that is God, that promised them. It's because God promised it and said it, I know it's going to be. That's all I need. Now, when I talk like that, when anyone talks like that, we make it sound easy. We know it's not. We would say, consider it's a done deal. It's done. No sweat. It'll be later on, when he gets to the destination, that all this would be revealed to him. So faith, you step out. And now faith and obedience are inseparable in man's relationship, anyone's relationship to God. Joshua chapter 3, verses 8, 13, 15 through 17. This is when the Israelites are crossing the Jordan River to take Jericho. God tells Joshua to tell the priest to carry the ark and walk up to the Jordan, right up to the edge. He doesn't say, and then wait for me to separate the waters. No, he says, step in the water. And after you step in the water, then the Jordan River will separate, or he'll stop the flow with a huge wall of water on one side. And the priests had to cross and stand midstream there with the ark as the Israelites crossed. The other part is that when they crossed, it was the time of the harvest. And the Jordan River was above flood stage. Normally it was only 100 feet wide, maybe 5 to 6 or 8 feet in depth. Well, now it's flood stage and above. So it's wider and really deep. The two greatest persons of primeval and patriarchal times, who are Noah and Abram, are models par excellence. They're the perfect examples of faith. By faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear, constructed an ark for the saving of his household. And by this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. So Hebrews 11. So the faith of both of these men produced amazing obedience. Remember, Noah did everything that God commanded him to do. We see that in Genesis 6 and in Genesis 7. Abraham obeyed and he went. We also see that both of these men were utilized to effect the salvation for others by their faith, their own faith. Noah, he wrought salvation for his family, and he preserved the promised seed of Eve. Abraham's faith created a people through whom the promised seed would be fulfilled. The way Abraham's faith began in the Ur of the Chaldeans, it continued throughout his whole sojourn. And it was the same faith by which he received his righteousness. Now, faith doesn't earn anyone righteousness. Faith receives it. Faith is the instrument by which we receive the righteousness that God gives. And then we read in Paul's letter that faith also is a gift. It's not something that you can work up. Abraham, he believed God, and he, God, counted it to him as righteousness. Genesis 15, verse 6.